Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 8.1 Affliction Warlock DPS guide for both Mythic Plus and rating. I did want to wait a little longer after 8.1 was released to see if we were going to receive any more tuning, but with Battle of Dazal'alor less than 3 weeks away, I felt it was safe enough to release. In this guide, I will be covering both Mythic Plus and raid talents, Azerite traits, pets, and a few different rotations, with some tips along the way. If you're interested in any of the weak auras or add-ons you see here, I have a link to my Twitch and Discord in the description below where you can find them. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Alright, now looking at talents is Affliction and Mythic Plus. In the first row here we have the options of Nightfall, Drain Soul, or Deathbolt, and fortunately / unfortunately, depending on how much you actually like Deathbolt, Deathbolt is realistically the only option in this row. Unfortunately, even if you factor in shard snapping and things with Drain Soul, its damage is so bad that literally having Drain Soul as your talent in this first row is a DPS loss over having no talent at all because it replaces Shadow Bolt. Unfortunately, Nightfall is also drastically undertuned right now, so Deathbolt is pretty much the only choice we have in the first row for Mythic Plus as Affliction. In the third row, we have the choice of Writhe and Agony, Absolute Corruption, and Siphon Life, and for Mythic Plus, our choices are pretty much either Absolute Corruption or Writhe and Agony. If you're running an Azerite set that has at least 2 sudden onset pieces on it, you're going to want to run Writhe and Agony over Absolute Corruption. However, if you have a set that only has 1 or 0 pieces with sudden onset on them, Absolute Corruption is going to be your best bet. Running Absolute Corruption gives you a lot more GCDs, not having to refresh corruptions or cast your Seeded Corruption every 8 or so seconds. And having a set consisting of a Racking Brilliance piece, an ID piece, and let's say even 1 sudden onset piece, you're going to want to run AC over Writhe and Agony. In the 60 row here, we have the options of Sow the Seeds, Phantom Singularity, or Vile Taint. And in this row here, the only viable option we have is Phantom Singularity. Unfortunately, a Vile Taint is still just pretty undertuned damage-wise, as well as a slow, not really mattering in higher keys, and it also costs a Soul Shard on a 20-second cooldown. Phantom Singularity is a really strong single-target DPS gain, as well as being a pretty strong AoE spell for trash packs and things of the sort. It doesn't cost a Soul Shard, and it's only on a 45-second cooldown, so you have it for pretty much every trash pack if they have any decent amount of health pool on them at all. Unfortunately, in BFA, Sow the Seeds was nerfed from 2 additional seeds to 1, so that in conjunction with Seeded Corruption being so lackluster right now, makes Sow the Seeds not a good choice here. So in the 60 row, our only option really is Phantom Singularity. In the 90 row, we have the options of Shadow's Embrace, Haunt, or Grimoire of Sacrifice, and once again in this row, the only real choice here, in my opinion, is Haunt. Grimoire of Sacrifice is just a little undertuned right now, and you gain a lot more from Haunt just from the actual playstyle of Affliction. If there's a pack with 4 or 5 mobs present, you can have multiple Agonies rolling, which means multiple Racking Brilliance procs if you're running Racking Brilliance, but it also means multiple shards coming in, multiple unstable afflictions. Then being able to put Haunt, and unless you have if you have a priority target in that mob or in that pack, being able to put Haunt on that target and then roll multiple unstable afflictions on it really pushes Haunt above Grimoire Sacrifice here, and also Shadow's Embrace, partially because Shadow's Embrace is harder to maintain and Haunt's only on a 15-second cooldown, and if the target dies when Haunt's on it, the durations automatically reset. And finally in the 100 row we have Soul Conduit, Creeping Death, or Dark Soul Misery, and we can pretty much just ignore Soul Conduit like we pretty much do with every other spec here, and with our choices being between Creeping Death or Dark Soul Misery. In my opinion, I personally feel, and mostly everybody does as well at this point, that Dark Soul Misery is the cooldown you want over Creeping Death in the final row here. Dark Soul Misery is on a 2-minute cooldown. It gives you 30% haste, which is a pretty strong choice for both trash packs and bosses, and whether it be a mini boss, a trash pack with a priority add on it, or lining it up with your Dark Lair heading into a boss attempt. Creeping Death is a passive though, and it's not too far behind Dark Soul Misery, so if you really don't want to watch another cooldown or just don't really like the playstyle of Dark Soul Misery, Creeping Death is an option, but in my opinion and most everyone's opinion, Dark Soul Misery is the way to go for Mythic Plus overall in the final row here for Affliction. If you're running the Absolute Corruption build for Mythic Plus, you want to open on a precast Seed of Corruption if possible, right into a Haunt on the same target, which will pop the seed. You can toss Phantom Singularity on the Haunt target and hit Dark Soul Misery before applying Agony to all the present mobs after that. If there's a priority mob you want to kill more than the others, you should dump your Unstable Afflictions into it and then use Dark Lair on that mob. If you're looking for more of an even spread amount of damage, you should spread your Unstable Afflictions amongst different targets, as each target with UA on it takes 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% 10% If you're running the Wrath and Agony build, you should also try to open on a precast Seed of Corruption into Haunt on that target. Right after that, pop your Dark Soul cooldown and begin applying Agony to each target present. After doing that, you should then cast Phantom Singularity on the Haunt target and follow the guidelines for Unstable Affliction that we spoke about a minute ago. Remember that you will have to refresh your Corruption every 8 or so seconds, so be sure to save a shard for Seed of Corruption cast. I should also mention that if there are 2 or less targets, it's better to individually refresh Corruption on them, but if there are 3 or more targets, casting Seed of Corruption is optimal. As far as Azerite traits go for Mythic Plus, you should focus mostly on acquiring pieces with either Racking Brilliance, Sudden Onset, or Inevitable Demise. With the changes that ID received in 8.1, it's not nearly as strong of a choice as it was before, but is still a good survival trait in Mythic Plus, while also bringing with it a good bit of burst DPS if you enter a pack or boss fight with upwards of 40 stacks. Racking Brilliance is an all-around great trait that is based off Agony shard generation, and seeing as how Agony is pretty much our most important spell, it's pretty easy to see how strong this trait is everywhere. As I mentioned before, running 2 or more pieces with Sudden Onset on them makes Wrath and Agony the better choice DPS wise over Absolute Corruption for Mythic Plus. Even at 1 stack of Sudden Onset, however, it does boost Agony's damage by a good bit, so it's not a terrible choice when it comes to Mythic Plus. Alright, now looking at single target talents for Affliction, you're going to notice pretty quickly here that outside of the 45 and 75 rows here, there really isn't much that changes at all when it comes to talents for Affliction. In the 15 row, once again, it's the same case. Deathbolt is still the only viable talent here, and it's also a strong choice, so our choice in the 15 row here is easily Deathbolt. In the 30 row, we do have the options of Wrath and Agony, Absolute Corruption, or Siphon Life. Now, in a pure single target build like I'm talking about here, Siphon Life is going to give you the most single target DPS, and it should be the choice that you make. Now, with Pandemic Invocation now being a trait, or a new Azerite trait, there is a little bit of an argument here coming into the Battle for Dazal'alor 8.1 raid, where Wrath and Agony might be better than Absolute Corruption on multi-target fights if you're running Pandemic Invocation and can actually refresh your Agony and Corruption within its pandemic window every single time. Absolute Corruption gains a lot of value on multi-target fights, where you can have Corruption rolling permanently, and with fights having multiple adds present or 4 or 5 targets, Absolute Corruption is going to be the talent you want in this row, but for pure single target fights, Siphon Life is going to be where you want to be. In the 60 row, once again, the only single target option we even have here is Phantom Singularity. Vile Taint is still undertuned, costs a soul shard, just a weird talent, and same with Sow the Seeds. It's effectively useless right now, so Phantom Singularity is going to be what you want in the 60 row. Alright, in the 90 row we have the options of Shadow Embrace, Haunt, or Grimoire of Sacrifice, and once again, like the Mythic Plus build, Haunt is going to be the choice you want to make here in the 90 row for single target or even multi-target encounters. Haunt gives you a 10% bonus damage effect, while Shadow's Embrace gives you 9%, but it's also a bit harder to maintain Shadow's Embrace with movement or other mechanics factored in, and obviously factoring the 1% more DPS, Haunt is the clear-cut go-to choice here. There will be times on certain fights, let's say like Vectis for example in Uldir, where you can actually put Haunt on the ad, and if the ad dies before the Haunt expires, which it typically does on Vectis and things, Haunt's cooldown will be reset, thus allowing you to put it right back up on the boss instantly. In the final 100 row here, once again, Soul Conduit is not even an option, we're just not even going to look at that. The options we have here are Creeping Death or Dark Soul Misery. Now seeing as we're talking about single target builds here, honestly, I would say with just how well Dark Soul Misery synergizes with Dark Lair, Dark Soul Misery pretty much is your only go-to choice here. Obviously, on pull you use Dark Soul Misery in conjunction with Dark Lair, and if you only have, like I mentioned, 1 Dark Lair and 1 Dark Soul Misery left before the fight is over, you also save your final Dark Soul Misery for your final Dark Lair. It's a very strong DPS boost, especially when you're trying to pump out 5 Unstable Afflictions as soon as possible to get the DPS, the dot duration, increased with your Dark Lair as soon as possible. Affliction single target opener begins by precasting Haunt at about 2 seconds before the boss is pulled, right into Agony, Siphon Life, and then Corruption. Pop your Dark Soul Misery next and dump as many Unstable Afflictions into the target as possible, followed by Phantom Singularity, Dark Lair, then any unused trinkets, and then finally Deathbolt. After this we enter mostly a maintenance rotation of refreshing dots in their pandemic window, while also trying to keep 1 Unstable Affliction rolling as much as possible for the passive 10% bonus damage it grants while on the mob. Towards the end of the fight, if you're only going to get 1 final Dark Soul and 1 final Dark Lair, it's important to save them for one another to maximize overall DPS. Now as far as Azerite traits go, acquiring as many pieces with Racking Brilliance on them is advised due to how strong the trait is everywhere. Viable alternatives include Inevitable Demise, Cascading Calamity, Pandemic Invocation, and Archive of the Titans if you're still progressing or raiding Uldir. The first stack of Pandemic Invocation brings with it a great deal of DPS, but it loses a lot of value at 2 and 3 stacks, so be sure to keep that in mind when looking at the traits you want. Now I did want to touch briefly on Deathbolt, as I do receive many questions asking about the proper time to use it. You obviously use it in your opener as we just discussed, but outside of that, the only real guideline that I follow is to make sure Agony, Corruption, and Siphon Life are on the target and not in their pandemic window, and to have one Unstable Affliction rolling. Casting multiple UAs does not increase Deathbolt's damage really, as by the time you cast your third or so Unstable Affliction, the duration of your first one is halfway gone in addition to your other dots duration being lower. It also throws off the keeping one UA rolling as much as possible rule. I typically begin to pool shards at about 25 seconds before my Dark Lair is off cooldown, so I can have a full 5 shard Dark Lair. This is typically the only time that I cast Deathbolt with multiple Unstable Afflictions rolling on the target. As far as pets go, if an interrupt or purge is not needed, your imp will be the best choice overall, as it's the best at target swapping due to it being a caster. If you're in need of either a purge or an interrupt though, then the Fell Hunter easily gets the nod over your imp, as it has both, even though it's a little bit worse at target swapping due to the fact that it has to run from target to target. Now as far as my thoughts go on how Affliction is looking in the 8.1 raid Battle of Dazal'alor, I feel it's going to easily be the best spec on most encounters out of all 3 Warlock specs. With having tested every fight on PTR, I feel there's just too many fights that cater to both Absolute Corruption and multi-dotting in general. I do feel that there are some fights where we will either be playing Demonology or Destruction, but once again, Affliction currently appears to be the king in 8.1, at least when it comes to raids. As far as Mythic Plus goes, I still feel it's a great choice, but Demonology really closed the gap this patch with the new Azerite trait, as well as some buffs to relevant abilities and talents. The fact that Affliction still has an interrupt versus Demonology needing to run a suboptimal pet is pretty big though, so I feel they're both great choices, with each being better in different scenarios. As far as actual stat weights go, the best way to tell for your own character is to run a raybots.com stat weight sim. It will tell you what stats your specific character should be looking for, which could vary greatly when compared to someone else's. With all that being said, that about wraps up my 8.1 Affliction Warlock DPS guide. I really hope it gave you all a better understanding of how we're looking at 8.1 and hopefully answered any questions you might have had. If you have any more, feel free to post them in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. I'll have a link to my Twitch in the description below as well if you're looking to acquire any of the add-ons or weak auras you might have seen here. I will also be streaming all of our Battle of Dazal'alor progression come January 22nd if you're interested. If you want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons, as your support really helps. Thanks guys, and I'll see y'all pretty soon. Peace.